So we're dealing with boundary cases in terms of removing hametz. And until now, as we began the third chapter with cases of stuff that might or might not be hametz, that was dubiously hametz, that we said had to be removed, even though there was no punishment of karet, of cutting off, if we held on to it. And now we're going to deal with more boundary cases, just in terms of we begin with quantities, but we go on to situations. So we're going to deal with more boundary cases of hametz today. And we're going to carry on with this parallel between hametz and hallah and sacrifices, or tuma and tahara at any rate for today. So we're going to carry on with this triangle that we've been playing with ever since the beginning of the Masechet, and which indeed the Masechet is going to finish on. So we begin with this triangle, and believe it or not, as we get to the end of chapter 10, and we will finish chapter 10 before Pesach, we're going to finish on this triangle as well. But we're going to begin on the second Mishnah of chapter 3 with stuff that has got stuck in a crack. But sek she besidkei areva, dough that's got stuck in the cracks of the kneading trough. So we can't get it out, or at any rate, if these are small cracks, we probably can't get it out. If these are big cracks, we have a chance. And that's pretty much what the Mishnah advises us to do. If there's an olive's quantity in one place, one must remove it. And you can imagine, actually, an olive's quantity, you probably could remove it. But ve'im lo, if there isn't an olive's quantity, batel b'miuto, it's just nullified by the fact that it's small, right? We don't need to get rid of a quantity of hametz, because clearly dough, right? Dough in a kneading trough is clearly hametz, right? It's an open and shut case. But we don't need to get rid of it if there's less than an olive's bulk. By the way, this is a really interesting commentary on how we prepare for Pesach today. If we just keep in mind the fact the Mishnah says, look, if it's less than olive's bulk, you don't have to worry about it. That is really quite good medicine against any sort of obsessive compulsive disorder. And the Mishnah then goes on to say, "V'chein l'inyan hatuma." It's similarly for tuma and tahara, that if there's less than an olive's bulk, well, if there's less than olive's bulk, the situation is different. Because if there's less than olive's bulk, it's part of the kneading trough. And that is a problem, right? Because it's going to make the whole kneading trough tummy. If there's more than olive's bulk, well, we can just take it away. The food inside the dough that's tameh is not going to make the kneading trough tameh, so we can just take it away. So the halachic principles are the same for tuma and tahara, but the result is opposite. And then the Mishnah goes on to say, if he objects to it, it interposes. And I think this means if there's I'm not certain what this means, and I can't figure out from the commentators. Let's just keep going. Let's just hold that thought for a sec. I mean, interposing here is referring to interposing between the source of tuma and the kneading trough. If he actually wants to keep it in the kneading trough, harehu ka ariva. At that point, it becomes a part of the kneading trough. That really is a problem. That means that that can render the whole kneading trough tameh. That's a problem. But sek ha cheresh. This is cheresh means deaf. I suppose it could mean in the time of the Mishnah, I meant a deaf mute as well. So maybe this is dough that can't speak. It seems to be dough that we're not clear whether it's rising or not. But if there's some similar, which has become hametz, so it seems as if we're going to look for some other dough which is made in the same batch. If there's some other similar dough that's become hametz, ze asur, then our deaf dough becomes forbidden as well. There is an opinion that this is cheres, which is pottery, dough that has basically gone hard like pottery rather than cheresh, deaf. But I can't see any sign of that in my Kaufman manuscript. And gosh, I think we can agree that this end of the Mishnah seems to be a little bit incomprehensible. But if you don't mind, I just want to retain a sense of doubt about it and keep moving, because there are two other Mishnayot that we want to cover today. And we could spend a whole evening right on this Mishnah. Let's try to keep going. We're going to segue into hallah. And there's one principle which we need to get straight in our heads before entering this Mishnah, which is if we have hallah that's become unclean, so we're sort of moving from tuma and tahara into hallah. If we've got hallah which is unclean, we need to separate it on a festival. We have a problem with what we do with it. We don't burn holy things on a festival if they're tummy. We're not going to bake on a festival if it's not going to be eaten, because we only bake for ochel nefesh, for eat. We only bake for eating on a festival. You can't bake something which you're not going to eat. And clearly the unclean hallah is not going to be eaten. So what would you do on a normal festival? Well, normally you would just put it aside and you'd burn it after the festival finished. But hang on, it's Pesach. It's Pesach. We can't take dough and just put it aside because it's going to become hametz. So what do? We can't leave it aside. We can't burn it and we can't bake it. That is the question which the third Mishnah addresses. Heitzad mafrishin hallah b'tuma b'yom tov. How do we separate hallah on a festival? And this is Pesach, by the way, in a state of uncleanness. And different rabbis have different solutions. So Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Lo tikra lashem ad sheteafeh. She should not designate it until it's baked. By the way, the subject of the people in this part of the Mishnah are all women. So we've clearly got some, if you like, street evidence that women are baking and separating at this point. So Rabbi Eliezer says she shouldn't designate it until it's baked. Now we've learned when we looked at the Mishnah of hallah that if you have a large number of loaves, you can bake all of your loaves and then you take a whole loaf and give it to the priest. In other words, your hallah, rather than being a little bit of dough, you pull off your dough and throw in the bottom of the fire. If you have a large number of loaves, you actually give the priest a whole loaf. That's your hallah offering. That's a real hallah offering. So you give him a whole hallah, basically. So Rabbi Eliezer says as follows: look, what if we don't designate the hallah until after they come out of the oven? So when the loaves are going into the oven, well, they're all fit to eat, or each one individually is fit to eat, because the one that's going to be designated as hallah might be a different one. So we can actually bake them all. We can bake them all because they all have the potential to be eaten. And then Rabbi Eliezer says, we're going to designate one as hallah after they come out of the oven. And then fine, we can burn it after the chag, but it's not hametz anymore. It's been baked. Interesting evidence, by the way, that they were baking their matzah on Pesach. By the way, I mean, generally you can bake bread on chag. We bake all of our matzah before Pesach, but clearly in the time of the Mishnah, they're baking their matzah on Pesach. So she's going to bake all of her matzah, and then once it's baked and we're not afraid of rising anymore, we're going to designate one for the priest. That's Rabbi Eliezer. Let's have a look at some more options for our conundrum. Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera Omer, Tatil Betzonen. Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera says, look, she should just put it in cold water. So she designates the dough, puts it in cold water, and then it won't rise. We'll come back to this one. Rabbi Joshua is the most interesting and creative. Amar Rabbi Joshua, lo ze hametz she muzharim alav b'val yera'eu v'al yimatzeh. Rabbi Yoshua says, no, this is not the hametz that we're warned about. Do you remember the pasuk that we brought a couple of days ago? No leavened bread shall be seen for you. Lo tera'eh lecha hametz. And no leaven shall be seen for you. Usor lo yera'eh lecha. I think that's the language of the pasuk. No leaven shall be seen for you. Rabbi Yoshua wants to make the point that you're forbidden to see. You can't see. You can't possess your chametz. But, of course, as we learned in the discussion on ownership of chametz, there's nothing to prohibit you seeing someone else's chametz. And Rabbi Yoshua is saying, look, this hallah, it's not your hallah. It's the priest's hallah. So the prohibition doesn't apply to it. And so he's going to say, Eila, mafrashta, umanachta, ata erev. She just separates it and she puts it aside until the evening. Ve'im hechmitza, hechmitza. And if it ferments, it ferments. It doesn't matter if it ferments. We don't need to put the cold water on it because it's not our challah. It's the priest's challah. It's his problem, is not our problem. And of course, he hasn't received it at this point, so he doesn't even know. It's not his problem until he receives it. So that's Rabbi Yehoshua. Let's just go on with more practical issues. Rabban Gamliel says, Shalosh nashim lashot ka'achat ve'ofot b'tanur echad zo achar zo. Rabban Gamliel says 3 women can actually share an oven. And we could imagine, by the way, with the technology of the Mishnah, there were probably not that many ovens around. So it would have been common to share an oven. So Rabban Gamliel says, look, 3 women can knead at the same time and bake in one oven, one after the other. Well, so I guess he has confidence that they won't leave the dough too long before it becomes hametz, even if they're queuing for the oven. And the sages are going to disagree. Chachamim omrim, shalosh nashim oskot babatzek, achat lashav, achat orechet, ve'achat ofa. So the Chachamim are saying, look, if we're going to do this, we need some kind of production line. One person is kneading. She doesn't start kneading until the second person has finished kneading and started shaping. And the third person at this point is baking. So we put a production line together in which one woman is kneading, one woman is shaping, and a third woman is baking. So we know that they kind of shoot through one by one, and we're never left with dough which is hanging around, getting fermented. And Rabbi Akiva is going to say, Rabbi Akiva Omer, lo chol anashim, velo chol ha'etzim, velo chol ha'tanurim shavin. You can't make a generalization about all women or all kinds of wood or all kinds of ovens. I mean, this is this is quite a deep comment, and we could spend a lot of time thinking about it. But he's quite right. You can't generalize about people. And he gives the principle, or I think he gives the principle. It's not quite clear whether this is his principle or the principle generally of the Mishnah, but I think he gives the principle, Zehaklal. And we know very often, by the way, Rabbi Akiva brings a principle. We've seen this before. So I think this is probably Rabbi Akiva's principle. Zehaklal tafach til tosh butsonen. If it rises, she should just dunk it in cold water. In other words, we might have people kneading at the same time, but if something starts to rise, we just take corrective action and we dunk it in cold water. Remember, we're in a warm climate and we can reduce the speed at which fermentation takes place very substantially just by dunking in cold water. And that's how we make sure that our matzot do not become hametz.